So it's a great pleasure to introduce Neil Plumridge, who is Oceania Advisory Managing Partner at Ernst & Young. Neil, lovely to see you.
Good to
Again,
see you too,
he
Beverley.
was next to me at dinner and he behaved himself beautifully. That's my story. Do you have another one?
You did too.
Now, let's talk about your group. Run through the main key features that came out of your discussions.
Look, we had an excellent conversation. It could have gone on for a lot longer. We were asked to provide 3 points, but we struggled with that. We ended up with 5 or 6. The first one was around our role in Asia and mindset, having an Asian mindset, but our role being one of both an enabler as well as a player and participant in the benefits of the growth of Asia. So, but not to miss the first role being an enabler through research and the like. And we spoke a lot about the presentation from the Solomon Islands about the work that that team's doing and our role in playing that. So really role and mindset. And the second was around connectivity and communication. I think that's a theme that's been running through the whole day. We thought that actually starts with ourselves. So rather than trying to build new connectivity and relationships with Asia, we think there's an opportunity to better connect within Australia, stop competing with ourselves, and not just what we communicate, but how we communicate. We think there's an opportunity there. The third was in education. Lots of conversation about everything comes back to education, and it needs to start very early in the primary schools. So, you know, one of the ideas is why don't we have compulsory second languages in our schools and have them with an Asian flavour. There was also conversations around the engagement of our students today. There was some good points brought up by a student on our table saying that there's a body of our students that are apathetic and disengaged with where Australia is heading. So rather than having us adults talking about the Asia future, where's the lens on the future from the younger generation? So, and then there's a whole lot of other ideas, better business links with the universities, two-way secondments and the like. So it was a really robust conversation around education. The fourth was why don't we aspire to be the energy centre for Asia with the natural endowments that we have across all forms of energy. You know, there's no reason why we can't aspire to be the natural energy centre leader. And then the last area is global champions. Where are they? Where's our global world-class organisations with the scale and muscle to play at a global level, and why don't we have more? So we have, for example, Forbes published, I think it was Forbes or Fortune published recently, the top 100 innovators in the world, and only CSL was on that list. Where are the rest of the Australian organisations? Why don't we have a lot more? And then we could go on with a food bowl and the like, so I'll stop there.
No, but let's flesh out some of those ideas that came up, and I might take the last one first because I think that's a really interesting one, the idea of global champions. Was there any thought amongst your group as to why we had been lagging in that area?
Look, it comes back to scale a little bit, but also mindset. So there was a conversation around a lot of the mindset has been the world starts in Sydney and finishes in Perth. Now there's lots of examples of where there's some great Australian companies competing overseas and winning markets and the like. But with 22, 23 million people, there has been a small mindset in a lot of our industries, not in every case. And I think one of the presenters talked a little bit about that before.
Communication, we've heard that a lot of the last session that we had before lunch focused on communication and how we communicate. What did your group think was lacking? Was it political communication?
No, it was. There was a lot around innovation. So we need to think about who we're communicating to. I think one of the presenters before talked about let's start with the customer or the consumer or whoever we're trying to influence. Someone raised the point of a lot of our trade negotiations. We turn up with our English language and an interpreter. When it gets really hard and the nuances, we don't know what's going on. So it's not just what we communicate, but how. It links back to the branding. I think there was a good presentation previously around the branding of Australia and thinking innovatively in how we communicate, not just what we communicate.
And I thought the final point that we might chat to you about is just the engagement of our younger generation, which is a really, really tricky one because to a degree, I guess, they've been the lucky generation. They've had so much on offer. They've lived through this incredible boom. How do we engage them?
It's a great point. I probably should ask someone at a younger generation, Beverley. Look, the point that was made, and then it started with the point in our universities in business and commerce degrees. There was a statistic given that there's 50% domestic, 50% international students, or thereabouts, across the top 7 or 8. There's a wall between our international students and domestic students. There's no communication across those groups. And that an example was given at our table when an Australian student arrived at a course. There were 30 others. He was the only Australian, or there was 2 or 3 others. He couldn't engage in the conversation, became disengaged, and never turned up to the lectures again. So I think there's some obviously really good things going on in our universities, but I think there's an opportunity for us to peel back the onion, what is really going on in the minds of the students and how they're engaging with the content, how they're engaging with their fellow students, how they're engaging with the business community, what happens when they leave work, where are the networks and the alumni relationships. So I think there was good agreement. We had quite robust conversations about how healthy our universities are. So I think there's more to do.
Some terrific ideas. Paul, I'll hand back to you.
And Neil, just before we turn away from you, I noticed you were charged with producing 3, you produced 6 ideas, and that's fine, but I'm sorry, we just need one. Which would be the one that your group really felt strongly about?
Education, that dominated on my table. We had 3 tables. The table that I was on, the majority of the conversation and the passion came back to education.
Thank you very much, Neil. May I now introduce, please, Cristina Talacko. Cristina is Director of the Council on Australian, Latin and American Relations. Cristina, Group 2, could you share with us, please, what your discussion points were?
We also had a very varied group, so different backgrounds and different industries, which was quite enlightening. The first point that came up during the discussions was going back to more of a philosophical one, I guess, which was whether the debate should be Australia should be focusing as a regional player or as a global player, as the world gets a lot more globalized and the idea of regions and demographic areas becomes a bit less important. And there was a general consensus that Australia should continue to develop its regional bases and its regional influence, but never forgetting that we also have that role as a global player. And we should not underestimate or forget our relationship with other countries and other blocs as Europe, emergent countries like India and Brazil, or the Latin American region. There's always something that can be offered in a bilateral sense with other countries and other regions as well. And in that same point, some of our debaters brought up the fact that there is a certain uncertainty in general with the prediction of the Asian region itself and China. Somebody mentioned, for example, the results of the investments that China all the investments that have been occurring from China into Africa, how it will affect Australia. So, in other words, we have to continue focusing on our regional obligations and responsibilities and having a strong regional presence, but also developing even further our global presence. And that's being done through different groups, blocks that Australia participates, as the G20, the Ernst group, but also APEC is an important bloc, and we believe that you know, as a global player, Australia does have all the tools and all the resources to become a very strong voice in the global scene. Secondly, I guess then other issues started arising on a different basis. Some of our debaters discussed, for example, food security, and there's a big debate and a little bit of negative thoughts on the closure of food processing companies here, which doesn't really assist in the development of the food of Australia as the basket for the world. We also discussed the sustainability issues and how to generate more clean energy when the cost is high. So there were discussions on at government level and also corporate level on how to incentivize, how to actually overcome those issues of cost for Australia. Because even though we are a large country, there's scarcity of water and other resources, and that becomes difficult for agriculture. But so there was a lot of talks surrounding the food security issues and how Australia does not have at the moment a global scale food processor. We discussed, for example, how Australia should maybe examine what other countries have done well in that sector. For example, New Zealand with Frontiera, and how they managed to, for example, invest in other countries to improve their, their capabilities. We discussed, for example, the new energy sources and this issue of sustainability on a country that mostly it's coal generation. How do we actually change that? And thirdly, as another important aspect of what we were discussing, there were issues of what are our responsibilities that come from the relationship with Asia. It is a bilateral situation, therefore, are we prepared, for example, in this relationship to receive more inward investment or more immigration as a response to that development of this relationship? So how is Australia opened to view its own responsibilities and that come from those opportunities? So they're not just opportunities, but we also have a responsibility towards a better engagement with Asia. Some people discussed the languages and education in general, and others disagreed that language was a major point of bringing us closer to the region or to other countries. They believe that business comes first, and then the language, is irrelevant, as in most, it's actually impossible to speak every language in every country that you're dealing with. But there was a strong belief that we must, that education is a good starting point, that we must receive more students and build that bridge a little bit further than it is at the moment.
Well, thank you very much. That's very comprehensive. And I wonder if you would take a couple of questions, and if I went in the order in which you presented them, could you share with us a little bit, please? I noticed the dichotomy in your group where you talked about Australia in the world and then Australia in Asia. To what extent did you talk about Australia being the voice of Asia, the leader out of Asia to the world?
Yes, we have concentrated a lot more in the discussion of, I believe most of the group believes we are already engaging with Asia sufficiently and needs to develop even further as the voice of Asia. We haven't got to the stage of discussing Australia as the voice of Asia, but what we discussed was that there must be some, that Australia should look at itself on a multipolar, with a multipolar view in terms of being relevant to most regions in the world as a global player.